to be worshiping together this morning. Now, speaking of escaping family, you should know this morning, Pastor Craig is doing something that he occasionally does. He's taken a mission trip to the Woodway and West campuses of our church. And I grew up at those campuses, and I can tell you they desperately need it. So he is there today, and you have me this morning. We are going to talk about a few things today. I hope that some of y'all had a great Christmas with great presents that maybe you received, or some of you may be hurting from the presents that you had to give to your family. At my house, we had my second child, Theo. He basically received every dinosaur toy within a 28-mile radius of our house. So that's what we have. But I want to tell you about my favorite Christmas gift that I got this year, and it was my favorite because I picked it. I saw this journal, and we gave it to a person who's volunteered and led at our church for a long period of time, so we gave it to him as a thank you, and I liked it so much that I decided I wanted my wife to get me one of them. And basically all it is it's this leather journal, but the thing I like about it is that I can fool myself into thinking it's like a sea captain's log, and I look at it and I feel like I'm important when I write in it. The other thing that's nice is because it looks like a sea captain's log, it gives me an excuse when someone sees how bad my handwriting is. I could say, well, I wrote it while I was at sea, which is not true. The reason I like this gift, though, and other things like it, is that I have personally found, and you may have found this as well, that there is power to writing things down. When you have goals or aspirations or things that you want to happen in the future, there is some power in writing down the commitment that you're making to yourself or the commitment of the thing that you're wanting to try and achieve. And I'm not saying this, but I have to give this disclaimer because this is popular in some parts culturally. I'm not saying that there's some sort of magic or incantation into saying that you want something and that it's going to happen for you. That's not what I'm saying. That's a thing that some people call manifestation, and it's complete garbage. It is just not true, and at worst, it's actually, I would say it's nefarious, the idea. But writing things down is powerful for a couple reasons. One is this. When you write something down, there are very few things that can allow you to clarify your thoughts, like having to write it down clearly. Before you've written it down, usually your thought is just a thing floating off in the ether. When you have to write it, it forces you to clarify your words, clarify your thoughts, and put it down. The other thing that writing things down does is that it makes it so that you can look back and hold yourself accountable in the future for what you've written down, which, by the way, is a scary part of writing things down. It means you actually have to hold up your end of the bargain or look back later at how strange your thoughts were. It's actually part of the reason if you ever come across an old thing that you wrote when you're younger, like a diary entry or something like that, a lot of times it's so funny to see, wow, that's where my head was at that moment. Now, this is the time of year that people who make journals and goal books and things like that make all of their sales, right? Because when you roll over into the new calendar year, this is when many of us decide, I'm going to set my goals for this next year. And I found in my life personally, I do think writing down goals, whether you always meet them or not, is helpful. You put them down in writing, they're there concrete, you can check them later and hold yourself accountable. And I do want to give you some advice on goal setting that I have heard in the past that I think is pretty helpful. If you do decide to make goals or resolutions in this next year, here are a few helpful hints for how you do it. The first one is this. It is not a goal if it is not specific, if it is not on a timetable, and if it's not measurable. So let me give you an example of this. This is not a goal to say, I want to lose weight. Not a goal. That is just a thought floating off in the sky. A goal would be something more like making it specific. So maybe you would say instead of, I want to lose weight, you would say, I want to lose 15 pounds. Better, closer, but there's still not a timetable and there's no way to measure it. So a real goal would look something like this. I want to lose 15 pounds by April. That way you've made it specific, you've made it measurable, and you can check your work later on. So if you set goals, that's just a word of advice. Specific, measurable, and then something that you can actually do, something that is attainable. So what I'd like to do at the start this morning, before we read our text, and by the way, if you have your Bibles, we'll be in John chapter 8. That will be our main text for today. But one thing I would like to do is maybe give you a few categories of areas in your life this next year where maybe you do need to set goals, or maybe you need something to change in your life. I mean, the reason that we would even need to make a goal in the first place is that we might have to acknowledge there's an area of my life where I need something different, or I need something new. So what I put together really quick is a New Year checklist of some areas in your life where maybe you might need something new in this next year. Now, if I name one that sends off any bells in your head that this is an area that you do need something, it might be worth writing it down to think later about a goal you would set. So here's my first one in the New Year checklist. My words. Have your words in the last year, the words that you've spoken to others, the words that you've spoken even to yourself, have your words been honoring to the Lord, and have your words been at par with what God wants you to do? And if not, do you need to change your words in this next year? If your parents were to hear the way you were talking when they weren't around, would they wash your mouth out with soap? That's a question. Not even about things like curse words. Have your words been affirming to other people? Have you been a negative influence on other people with your words? Have you spoken bitterly toward other people when you didn't need to? That is an area where maybe you need to set a goal. Here's another. My relationships. Have your relationships in this last year been what they need to be? Have they been life-giving? Have they been God-honoring? Or have they not? Some of you might just be thinking, I just want to be in a relationship in the first place. Fair enough. But do you need to get something new in your life as far as relationships are concerned? Here's another one, my body. This is usually an area where a lot of people make New Year's resolutions about working out or losing weight. And certainly, the way that you take care of your body is going to affect a lot of things in your life. And maybe you have some sort of goals or new things that you need in your life with the way you take care of your body. Here's another one, my private thoughts. We spoke about your outward words a moment ago. Has your internal thought life been what it needs to be in this last year? Have you been dwelling on things that are uplifting and bring you closer to the Lord? Or are there some things that you need to cut out of your internal thought life? We'll talk about that more in just a little bit. The last two would be my time and my money. Now, time and money are both limited resources that we have, and the way that we use them shows where our passion is, where our priorities are. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit again in just a few minutes, but the point that I bring all this up is to say, I think as we've gone through these things, my words, my actions, my thought life, my body, I think all of us have certain areas where it becomes obvious that we need something new in our life. We need something different in this next year and then onward, even into the future. Well, the good news is this. All of us have areas where we need something new, and there is no one in the history of humanity or in the universe that is better at bringing something new than Jesus himself. You know, every interaction that Jesus had during his ministry, he was giving transformative opportunities to the people that he spoke with, to the people that he touched, to the people that listened to him. And Jesus offers the same sort of new things for us. So here's very simply what we're going to do this morning. We're going to read a powerful story from Jesus' life, and we're just going to reflect on a few new things that Jesus offers in this story, and then potentially to your life and to my life for this next year. So the story's in John chapter 8. I'm going to read the first 11 verses, and then we will talk about it afterward. It says this, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him. And he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now, when the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women, what then do you say?' They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, 'He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her.' Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone, and the woman, where she was in the center of the court. Straightening up, he said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said, 'I do not condemn you either. Go, from now on, sin no more.'" Powerful story from the life of Jesus, this one interaction that Jesus has. Just to review the story, because it's going to help us talk about it afterward. The main people involved here are Jesus, obviously. He's teaching around the temple. Then there are the scribes and the Pharisees who come to Jesus. For the rest of the story, I'm just going to call them the Pharisees, because that's the main group that's interacting with him here. The Pharisees, by the way, at this point, they'd been watching Jesus. And in John chapter 7, the chapter before this, we find out that the Pharisees did not trust Jesus. They were already starting to think that he was a lawbreaker. They were starting to think that he was against their agenda. And so they were already plotting ways to get rid of him. They might have been contemplating a little bit of light murder toward Jesus at this point. So they try to trap Jesus in this story. And so they do this by bringing the third person, which is this woman. This woman was caught in the act of adultery. We are not given a great deal of detail about what happened, but simply this woman was caught in a way where she, according to the law of Moses, could be executed. So they bring her to him. And by the way, bringing a hairy, ethical, moral, legal issue to a respected teacher would have been very normal in first century Israel. So if there were a rabbi who they respected, they thought they knew the law, people would bring questions to him. They'd bring disputes. What do we do in this situation? So they bring this woman to him. They say, this woman was caught in adultery. The law says that we could kill her. We could stone her. It's what we should do. What do you think that we should do? Now, for the Pharisees, this was a ruse to try and trap Jesus. It says that specifically, that they brought her to him so that they could possibly accuse him. Now, why is that? Well, basically, they were trying to pin Jesus in a lose-lose situation. So if Jesus were to say, yes, let's do what the law of Moses says and let's stone this woman, then what they could do is they would undermine everything that Jesus had done in his ministry before. Keep in mind, Jesus had given himself a reputation for being a friend of sinners. He cared for people that were on the outskirts. He would seem harsh and punitive. And so they would do that to him. And then also, it would show them, okay, well, he's on our agenda of keeping the law. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But however, if Jesus were to make the right decision and say, no, let's not kill the woman, that is overly punitive, it's not fair, if he were to say that, then basically they could accuse him of being a lawbreaker, which would have been the greatest insult that they could have given to Jesus. And again, we'll discuss why in a moment. So they bring him in this pickle, and they're trying to put him in a heads I win, tails you lose type of situation. So whether he says, yes, let's execute her, they win, or if he says, no, don't, then they win as well. They could discredit Jesus at that point. But Jesus obviously does not fall into their trap. It says that he crouches down and starts doodling in the dirt with his finger, drawing something. Now, I and every person who has ever read this text wonder, what was Jesus writing in the dirt? Because he's writing something in the dirt, and by the time he gets up and speaks to them, they all walk away, dejected. I always like to imagine that he was painting some sort of like Bob Ross painting on the ground, but that's probably not what it was. We don't know what Jesus was doodling, but I think what he was doodling was probably important because he didn't say much when he stood up. He stood up and says to them, he who has not sinned can throw the first stone. He says that to them. And that would have been an interesting thing to say to the Pharisees. The Pharisees cared about the law. They cared less about individual sins. They cared about strictly keeping the law of Moses. But it makes me wonder, was Jesus writing something in the dirt that might have incriminated the Pharisees of the sin that was in their hearts? Now, there were texts in the law that would say when someone commits adultery that they could be executed. So I want to read a couple of those for you. The first is in Leviticus chapter 20. It says, if there is a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. So that's one of the things the Pharisees were using. Also, Deuteronomy 22 says this, if a man is found lying with a married woman, then both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. Thus, you shall purge the evil from Israel. So the point of these laws, by the way, in the Old Testament, was to preserve Israel, to keep them different from the rest of the world. God did not want them to be contaminated by sexual immorality, idol worship, things like that. And so the point was to purge the evil from among you. Now, you might have noticed in this story, the Pharisees bring the woman to Jesus. But is anything missing in this accusatory setting of this story? The man, right? Where's he? Was he fast? He was like Usain Bolt and could run away? No, it seems more likely that what probably happened here is that the Pharisees probably trapped the woman so that they could trap Jesus. The burden of proof in catching someone in adultery in the Jewish law would be that two adult men would have to witness the same act happening at the same time. It seems pretty unlikely that they just so happened to stumble upon this woman and not the man and then be able to bring her to Jesus. It seems like what's happening here is that the Pharisees maliciously entrapped this woman, brought her to Jesus so that they could get to Jesus. This woman is a casualty in the middle of this cultural, religious, political battle between the Pharisees and between Jesus. There were also verses in the law that basically said this, If you were a malicious witness in a trial, meaning you were deliberately trying to get someone else in trouble, you lied about it, or you were malicious in the way that you did it, you would be liable for the same punishment that you were trying to hit the other person with. So maybe Jesus was writing in the ground some of these passages about being a malicious witness. Maybe, we know this about Jesus, Jesus often knew the internal thought life of other people. Maybe Jesus was writing some of the sins of the Pharisees who maybe had committed adultery themselves that were right there. Whatever he does, he stands up and says to them, if you haven't sinned, you can throw the first stone. And they all walk away dejected. Notice the oldest of them walk away first because they're the most aware of their own sin. They walk away, and so Jesus is left there with the woman, and he says, where did they go? Who condemned you? And she says, none of them. And he says, I don't condemn you either. Go and sin no more. Man, what a powerful story that Jesus interacts with this woman and with the Pharisees. There's a few things that I want to point out in this story that I think Jesus was offering to the woman, to the Pharisees, and is offering also to you and I. New things that God could give us in this next year. The first one is this. Jesus offers new perspective. The angle that you look at something is incredibly important in the way that you perceive reality. Every one of us has a unique perspective on the world from everyone else around you. In fact, many of you in this room have a unique perspective of how you're looking up here right now. Depending on if you're on the east side or the west side, your angle to see what's going on up here is slightly different. And our lives are the same way. Your perspective on the world is formed by your natural inclinations. It's formed by the way your parents raised you. It's formed by your experiences. It's formed by the culture that you live in. And so for that reason, it's good. All of us have slightly unique perspectives from each other. But the difficult thing is this. Your perspective on the world is, at best, limited. You cannot see the whole picture. At worst, your perspective can sometimes be distortive. It can keep you from seeing things as they really are. I have a cartoon that I want us to look at really quick, a comic, and you need to suspend your disbelief for a moment. It's a picture of a rhino. Now, obviously, rhinos don't have fingers or thumbs and cannot paint. But in this picture, this rhino is painting landscapes of the things that he sees. And you might notice that in each one of these pictures that the rhino is painting, the paintings are made up of about 60% of a giant mountain in the middle of what he's doing. Why is that? Well, the reason is his perspective is blocked by the horn directly in front of his face. He can't see things exactly as they are because his perspective is distorted. I want to offer you this. Your life, just because of the way that you were raised and the fact that you have a limited view of the picture of the world, there are times that your view of reality could be as distorted or worse than this rhino. Your perspective can keep you from seeing things as they really are. I want to talk for a moment about the perspective of the Pharisees in this passage. We've talked about the Pharisees quite a bit so far in Galatians as we've read through it, but I'll be very simple in explaining this. The Pharisees were a populist group in first century Israel, and by populist I mean they were regular people, mostly men. They were regular men, and they were passionate about one thing. They were passionate that they wanted all of Israel to follow the law of Moses. The reason they thought this was that they looked back at Israel's history, and they basically came to the conclusion and said, every bad thing that has ever happened to our people has happened because we've ignored God's laws. We have worshiped other gods and ignored God's laws. Now, to be fair, the Pharisees were pretty close to right. Wouldn't you say, when you read the Old Testament, that's pretty close to the reality of the situation. The people of Israel would worship other gods, they would disobey the law of Moses, they would forget the law that God had given, they would fall into ruin, and that would happen over and over again. And so the Pharisees were looking at the world in the first century, and they were asking, how is it that we could experience all of the promises that God had made to our people? Now, again, these are things that we've talked about in Galatians, but all of Israel's history traces back to the promises that God made to Abraham in the book of Genesis. And those promises were very simple. He promised Abraham that he would have many descendants, and that happened. Remember, he had Isaac when he was very old, and his wife was very old. But his descendants were all over the place, and there were many of them in Israel. The second was that his descendants would inherit the promised land. Now, in the first century, they were in the promised land, but they didn't possess it, correct? The Romans were in charge of the promised land. And the third was that they would be a great nation. The Pharisees were looking at this and saying, God's promises have not been fulfilled to us. There are many of us. We don't own the land. We have not inherited the land that God has given us, and we are surely not a great nation. And so here's what they said. If we could get every person in Israel to stringently follow the law of Moses, then maybe God will have no choice but to bless us. Maybe we won't be under the thumb of the Romans or the Greeks or these other major powers. And so their view of the world was simply this. We have to get everyone on board. We all have to follow the law of Moses, and then God will bless us. So for that reason, the Pharisees were very concerned with the sins of other people. They were very concerned with the sins that might make all of Israel unclean. And so they would look at what was going on, and they were very stringent. We need to follow the law of Moses. Now, we say all that, and what's ironic about this reality in this passage is that the Pharisees were so intent on trying to see God's promises fulfilled that God was standing directly in front of them, and they hated him. Their perspective was so narrowed by their view of the world that God incarnate could be speaking to them, teaching in front of them, doing miracles in front of them, and they wanted to kill him. I would hope that you and I don't have any, let's say, political opinions, cultural preferences, deeply held, just personal preference beliefs that we hold so dearly that we don't see what God's doing when it's right in front of us. There's no priority in your life. There's no perspective thing. There's no opinion that you have that is important enough that you should hold on to it so tightly that you could miss what God is doing right in front of you. I wonder if you and I are sometimes like that rhino. We're painting the picture of what's going on in front of us, but we don't see the reality of it because our perspective is blocking us. The only way that your perspective can actually change, widen, see things the way that God does is through Jesus. Jesus is the only one that offers that new perspective to us. I want to go back to the New Year checklist that we talked about at the beginning here. The 2 points of that New Year checklist that I think involve our perspective are this: our bodies and then our private thoughts. Now, I've hinted at the fact that our bodies, we can make goals about how we take better care of our bodies, but I want to be specific right now about what we are allowing into our mind through our body. What am I looking at? What am I listening to? Am I allowing inputs into my life that are distorting my view of the world? I think that is an important thing, especially right now, for you and I to think about. We have more things that we have available to us to listen to look at, than any people in human history. You could see someone from across the world giving political commentary on your phone instantly. People in the past did not have to deal with that. You and I have to be very judicious about what we allow ourselves to see and hear. Are you listening to and looking at things that are drawing you closer to the Lord, or are you listening to and looking at things that are distorting your view? The other one is this: your private thoughts. What you look at and what you listen to then will largely formulate your internal thought life. I wonder, is your internal thought life healthy? In your mind, are you feeling grumbly, complainy, angry, bitter at the people around you? Or is your internal thought life focusing on the things that God has called you to do? Are you grateful? Are you thankful? Are you dwelling on God's word? Are you thinking about other things? Maybe this year, your monologue in your head might need to turn more into a dialogue with the God of the universe. If you want to change your perspective on the world, change what you're looking at, change what you're listening to, change what you're thinking about. If you do that, I can almost guarantee you the way that you see the world this next year will change. That's the first thing. The second thing is this: Jesus also offers us new priorities. Priorities. Now, the Pharisees, clearly, their priority was the law of Moses. They wanted people to follow the law, and they cared so much about the law that they didn't care if they destroyed people in the process of going after the law. For the Pharisees, this woman was just an afterthought. They didn't care what happened to her. They were trying to trap Jesus. So whatever they needed to do to get her was important to them. Now, this clearly was a misappropriation of priorities for the Pharisees. I wonder if you and I are doing all right with our priorities this year. Have we been prioritizing the right things, or have we been giving too much of ourselves to the wrong things? It's very easy for us to get our priorities askew. I have a story about this that I want to share with you. I came across, it's actually 2 stories. They're connected to each other, but I found them very funny when I heard them. It's about 2 guys, one named Edwin and one named Marcin. Both of these stories happened in New York City. And both of these involve phones, is what these stories are. So Edwin was on the train. He was going from where he lived to where he worked in New York City. And he had an unfortunate thing happen where he needed to use the bathroom while on the train. Not something I would recommend, but he had to do it. Sometimes it's got to happen. So he goes into the bathroom in the train, and I don't know how this happened, but somehow he dropped his phone into the train toilet. Nightmare scenario of what's going on here. Now, in a moment of cold, rational, reasonable logic, Edwin decided to shove his hand so far into the toilet that he got stuck, and they had to remove him using the jaws of life. This is what happened to Edwin because he loved his phone so much. A couple months later, another guy named Marcin was walking around in New York. He had his phone with him, and not much money, but he had a few of his things. And a gentleman approached him and held him at gunpoint and basically said, "Give me everything you have, give me the phone," is what he said. Marcin did not want to give up his phone. He said, "I don't want to give you my phone." And the guy said, "Give me your phone." He has a gun. And Marcin said, "I don't believe that you're going to shoot me." He was wrong. The guy shot him in the leg. Marcin was left there, bleeding on the ground, still unwilling to give up his phone afterward, by the way. He's sitting on the ground, holding onto his phone. Now, the thing that both of these guys in this story had a complete misalignment of priorities. One guy shoved his arm into a train toilet. The other guy allowed himself to get shot over a phone. But here's the kicker of these stories. This actually makes me so happy, and I love it so much. These things happened in the year 2003. This is the phone that the guy was willing to get shot over. This is a Nokia 3390. Anyone under the age of 25 in this room is like, what is that? What is this alien technology? That is what a phone used to look like. This was a Nokia. There's not much you could do on that phone. If you wanted to send a text message, you had to use T9 texting, where you had to kind of guess what the letters were going to be. It cost like 25 cents per text. Do people remember this? The most you could do on that phone was play the game Snake. I mean, this was not a smartphone. This phone was dumb. And this guy was willing to get shot over this phone. This is insane. It makes me wonder, are there any things in our life that we prioritize in a way that people who are looking at it 20 years later will say, "You gave that much of yourself to that? You were willing to give up time with your family for that? You were willing to pour your energy and devotion into that?" Now, I just wonder if any of us have things like that in our life. Back to our New Year checklist that we talked about before, as far as priorities are concerned, I think the two things that are worth evaluating are your time and your money. Your time is a limited resource. You only have so much of it, and the way that you spend your time shows the rest of the world what you care about. If someone were to do an audit of how you used your time this year, what would they see? This morning is Sunday morning. I have an Apple phone, much better than the Nokia there, but on Sundays, I get a notification of how much screen time I average per day on my phone. Gut punch every time I see it. I've wasted so much time in this last year. I wonder if you have as well. I wonder if there are things in your life that you need to get rid of as far as what you're spending time on. The other one is your money. Your money makes it very clear where your priorities are. Jesus said it this way: where your heart is, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, this is not exactly what Jesus was talking about here, but I think it applies. If you were to bring a bank statement of where you've spent your money in the last year and you were to have to give it to somebody, they could pretty quickly see where your priorities in your life are. I wonder, where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your money? Does that need to change in this next year? Do you need something new with the way that you are spending your time and your money? The last thing that Jesus offers, and this is specific to the woman in the story, is it's not just new perspective, it's not just new priorities. Jesus also offers new purpose. New purpose. There's a lot that we don't know about the woman in this story. You've already heard me lay my cards on the table. I think that the Pharisees abused her here. I think they tricked her and trapped her. But the thing that's also clear is that this woman was participating in sin. Jesus is clear about that. When he speaks to her at the end, he says, "I don't condemn you either, but go and sin no more." This woman was doing something that was destructive to her, destructive to the others around her. But Jesus forgives her, but then does not give her a pass. He does not say, "I forgive you, go and do whatever you want." No, he says, "I don't condemn you, now go and live a different life. Have a different purpose." Jesus offers us a new purpose. Maybe you've looked at this last year, and maybe in your work or in a lot of the things that you're doing, you're thinking, "I don't know why I'm even doing this. It feels so meaningless. Why am I doing these same things over and over again?" If you want to have real purpose in your life, the only way to find it is through Jesus. You can't manufacture your own purpose. Your purpose is a God-ordained, Christ-inspired thing. If you want to be in the middle of what God wants, in the middle of your purpose, it only happens by walking with Jesus, and he offers it. He says, follow me, go and sin no more. Now, for each one of you, that's going to look different. God has given you a unique set of gifts, a unique situation, a unique set of skills. He has a purpose for your life, but you cannot find it if you're spinning your wheels away from him. It only happens when you're walking with Jesus. Lay aside every other encumbrance in your life and find this new purpose. I have one last story I want to share with you before we're done, because I don't want to simply give you a list of things to do this next year. I'm not that interested in you making little small incremental changes in your life. I'm more interested in the God of the universe offering you an entirely new way of looking at the world, an entirely new set of priorities. And one of the places that I saw this was in a pastor at our church that poured into my life when I was a young person in ministry. He was at our church for decades. His name was Dr. Jim DeLoach, and he was a pastor at our church, wonderful, godly guy. And one of the things that Dr. DeLoach did is he poured into pastors and staff people at our church. There were a lot of pastors that saw him as a mentor, a father figure, a grandfather figure. I have a picture of Dr. DeLoach with my wife and I at our wedding. And so Dr. D was this wonderful guy. When I first started in ministry, I would go with another pastor at our church out to Dr. DeLoach's house, and he would just pour into us. He would share things from his life. He would listen to our questions. He'd answer them. Just such a wonderful, godly guy. And so Dr. DeLoach had become so important in my life at this point that when my wife and I started to date seriously, I told her, I want you to meet Dr. DeLoach. And so she did, and she loved him the first time we met. And when we got engaged, we set a meeting where we were going to go out to see him at his house just to talk through some premarital counseling stuff, and we were excited about it. Well, when the day came that we were going to go see Dr. DeLoach, my wife and I do not remember, and neither does my wife, what this was about. We got into a huge fight. And I don't remember what it was. I don't know if we've been in that big of a fight since then. This is when we were engaged. And I remember my wife saying this as it was time to get in the car. She said, I'm so mad at you, I cannot go out there with you. It's not fair to have to sit in this car and drive out to his house. I'm just so mad. And I was mad too. And I was like, listen, we told Dr. DeLoach we'd go see him. I don't know how many more chances we're going to get. Have you seen him? We don't have that much more time with him. And so she got in the car, and we drove out to see Dr. DeLoach. So we got to his house, and that car ride was icy, by the way. It was an icy car ride. And we got to where we were going, and we got out to talk with him. And so Dr. DeLoach right away started talking to us about marriage and what a blessing it was. He started talking to us about how much he had loved his wife, Doris, who he loved and cared for when she was sick. She had recently passed away. And so about 5 minutes into talking, I look over. My wife, we were engaged at the time, but my wife is crying. She leans over and hugs me, and I was like, did I just discover the greatest workaround in the history of relationships? When my wife is angry, we just go out to see Dr. DeLoach, and he fixes it. And I think it would have worked. I didn't get to test it that many times, but I think it would have worked every time. But the thing about Dr. DeLoach, and my wife saw it too when she met him, when I first met him and really spent time with him, he was different than any person that I had ever met in my life. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was. There was something different about this guy. It was almost like he had like an aura or a glow around him or something. And it wasn't because he was handsome. Obviously, you've seen the picture of him. But there was something about him that was just different, and I just couldn't figure out what it was. And the more time I spent with him, I figured out what it was. Dr. DeLoach, from the time that he became a believer, he was young, I think he was 19 or 20, and he was in the military, and he became a believer. From that time on, he decided for the rest of his life, he was going to say yes to the Lord in everything that the Lord asked him to do. And so not for months, not for years, but for decades, Dr. DeLoach was faithful in the little areas of life and in ministry. And after saying yes to the Lord over and over and over and over again, by the time I met him, he was an entirely different type of creature than he was when he was 20 years old. He was different enough to where he looked different to me than every other person I'd met. He was walking with the Lord. His perspective on the world was like God's. Now, obviously, he was human. He was flawed. He couldn't see everything perfectly, but he could see things largely the way that God did. His priorities were so clear. He was serving the Lord, he loved his family, and he would serve the church. That's what his life was, and his purpose was never in question. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was right in the middle of God's will for his life. And my encouragement to you would simply be this. Like I said before, I'm not interested in you making small incremental changes in your life. I'm interested in you and I experiencing something so new that we transform into different people. If you are able to say yes to the Lord in the little and big things of your life, maybe by the time that you have kids and grandkids, they'll look at you and say the same things that I'm saying about Dr. DeLoach. Maybe they'll say, she's unlike any person I've ever met before. She radiates the love and the wisdom of the Lord. He is different than any person that I've ever seen. He is not bitter. He's not angry. He sees the world the way God does. I would hope that you and I could walk with the Lord closely enough to where we are given a new perspective on the world, new priorities of how we arrange our life, and a new purpose that makes us so fundamentally different from everyone else in the world. That's available to us, but we have to do the same thing that the woman did, and we have to encounter Jesus.